There we go. This evening, ladies and gentlemen, for the fastest hour on fastest half hour on television, we pay homage to the late great Tim Conway, who gave us great laughs on the Carol Burnett show. And I pray that maybe I can give you some laughs here in talking about the subject tonight, which is who's God, what God, where God, if God. And we're being joined by Huff. Welcome, Huff. All my favorite people are here. Terrific. So this evening, I'm going to dedicate the teaching to my friend and colleague, Rabbi Jeff Roth, who has been at MOSh in past years, and I hope to bring him in again. This teaching is based upon a teaching of his in this book, Jewish Meditation Practices for Everyday Life. And in the book, he credits learning what I want to share with you from Rabbi Lawrence Kushner. For those of you who are, is there anybody who's not familiar with Rabbi Lawrence Kushner, who he is? Okay, everybody knows his name. Great. Alrighty. So I'm going to begin with, first of all, let's do a blessing for Torah study. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushenu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. I always say to my B'nai Mitzvah kids that I love the way that la'asok sounds like the word soak in English, to soak up Torah, but actually means to engage in or the business of Torah. I want to bring up Exhibit 1, which is right here. Where is everybody? There we go. Okay, so there are going to be a number of times where I'm going to ask you what you think, what's this all about, Alfie? I'll say, so what do we have here and what do you think it's about? So we're going to get inside the mind of Rabbi Mark Novak, which can be a dangerous thing to do. But any idea why a conversation about divinity, I might be pulling up this first exhibit. Anybody a guess? Mary, go for it. Unmute yourself. You can't do it. All right. You act it out. Oh, there you go.
Oh, wow. Technology. When I first looked at this, I thought, if one considers God is in everything before the Aleph and after the Beit. We think of the Aleph as the beginning. It's the beginning of the Alephet.
Yeah, that's right.
Everything before that, I don't know.
Well, you're onto it, I think. Which, if you look at how I've got the dot, dot, dots, these dot, dot, dots are kind of leading up to, in Hebrew, right? They're leading up to the Aleph. So the first letter of the Torah is a bet, right? Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. We shouldn't spend too much time contemplating what comes before the bet and this side. Because we know that Aleph comes before the bet, but if we start to contemplate that, the origins of divinity, or what there was before there was a was, before there was an is, our heads will explode, right? So we are, instead of that, we're encouraged to then look at Torah and take our guidelines from that. We're starting with bet. Now, the bet with Bereshit, bet is the first letter of the word bayit, for home. And if you look at the letter bet on the right, which is where would be before, right, Torah starts, it's closed. You see the way the bet is written here? This is a closed letter that leads us from right to left. It leads us to the left, which is into all of creation. So from the very nature of the beginning of the Torah, it's suggesting that we not pay too much attention with this, but let's pay more attention with that which our human minds can wrap themselves around. Now, what we know from experience, that is a difficult thing to do, wrapping our minds around Torah. And tonight we're going to try to wrap our minds around the nature of divinity and our relationship to divinity. And I'm going to bring up another diagram. Okay. So visualizing the relationship between God and creation. By the way, I use an explanation point between G and D and God. I love that. Remember when we were in Hebrew school, the teachers used to put a little dash because they didn't want to spell out God's name, which, by the way, there's absolutely no reason why you can't do that in English. You're not supposed to do it in Hebrew because then you might erase it, right? But Reb Zalman of blessed memory, he used to, in some of his books, he uses an exclamation point, where I just love. I love that. You've probably seen me do them before. So visualizing the relationship between God and creation as taught by Rabbi Jeff Roth from a teaching of Rabbi Lawrence Kushner. So now don't look at what I wrote underneath each of the diagrams yet, because I'm going to cover each of those things. And I want to encourage you, raise your hand or just call out. I don't think with this many people you actually have to be muted. So if you don't want to be muted, it might just make it easier to chime in. In looking at each of the diagrams, know that the larger blue represents divinity. Okay. Now, if we could see it, I would have had it in black, which is really the absence of color, right? And but I like blue, so I made it in blue. All right. So the larger circle is divinity, and what do you think the smallest circle represents?
People.
Remember, well, not just people, not just people, but what?
The Jewish people.
No, not the Jewish. Actually, definitely not the Jewish people.
The opposite of the Jewish people.
They're not Jewish people.
What are they doing on my screen? They're not Jewish people.
Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, and then everything else. Now, remember, one of the midrashim is that God comes to all the people of the world, and offers Torah to all the people, and the Israelites are the only ones that accept it. And the other thing is that long before Abraham and an introduction to him and the beginnings of Bnei Israel, there's just life. And so this is the smaller circle represents all of creation. Okay, all of creation and the relationship to the divine. Okay. So you can see the one on the upper left, the circle, it is outside, the smallest circle representing creation is outside of the larger circle representing divinity. So underneath it I write, that is Jewish theology that arises at the time of Avram. Now, anybody have a sense of what that means or how that played out? What was Avraham's relationship with divinity? Mary.
Well, he was depicted as the first person to question the faith of his fathers, the religion that he was brought up with, and challenge his father to think that there had to be something better than.
So you are referring to the midrashim about the idols and smashing the idols in his father's idol shop. Absolutely. Also, even so, if we were going to have a class on why Avram, why was he chosen, that would be one of the many things that we would list, right? Of that story. Another story is a famous midrash, right? That is from Bereshit Rabbah. Whenever you hear Rabbah following the word, it is the Bereshit Rabbah are the midrashim and the stories and the teachings about the book of Bereshit, right? So if you had Leviticus Rabbah, Vayikra Rabbah, that would be in relationship to Vayikra. All right, you're all familiar with this midrash that Abraham, right? This is before he's Avraham. He's out, boy, goes on a journey, and he suddenly comes upon a burning palace. He asks out loud, is it possible that this palace has no master? Right? So the palace is on fire. There's no one around. There's no fire trucks. There's no woo, woo, woo. There's no one running out. So he's wondering, what's going on here? Is it possible that this palace has no master? It is then that God peers out from the fire and says, I am the master of this palace. I am the master of this palace. Now, that would be, actually, think about it, a great midrash to use for our scorched earth, right? And what's going on with climate. But here, what do you make of that story? What is his aha when he hears God's voice of the divine emanating from the palace? What is this aha moment? What does he think to himself? Susan?
Can you hear me, Mark?
Yes, absolutely.
Good. I think that he must be thinking, well, God's in charge. God can make this happen. God can build. God can destroy.
There is someone, something, a power, a force in charge of this. There is some greater mashgiach, right? Overlooking. Everybody know the word mashgiach? We have a mashgiach at a wedding that's behind the scenes with the caterer, overseer, overseeing the kashrut of the food. So God is the mashgiach of reality. That's what Abraham comes to. Okay. By the way, there is a term that is referred to hashgachat pratit. Hashgacha, you hear the word mashgiach in that word, right? Hashgacha pratit is like when you have a sense that you are directed in your life, and that divinity is not just interested in you, but invested in you, watching out for you, right? That the steps that you have taken, that you have been guided in some way. If that is your sense and that is your theology, that's what you practice. That's what you understand, your theology, hashgachat pratit. Alrighty, so looking back at that diagram. So Jewish theology arises at the time of Abraham, where divinity lies outside of all of unknown reality, of known creation, right? This is a transcendent God, totally other than, right? This is Melech HaOlam. This is the king of the universe. This is the master of the house, like what's in the song, right? In Master of the House, in Les Mis, right? That is divinity within this theological framework. Divinity remains here, Ein Sof, and will always continue to be. Ein Sof meaning without end, without beginning, without end, which is why we are warned not to spend too much time in that Aleph because you're going to fall off the end of the cliff before you come to any kind of resolution. Alrighty. So now we're going to make our way to the next one to the right. All right. So what's the difference between the one on the left and the one on the right? Pretty obvious. What is it? What do you see?
The external force is larger and closer.
So don't pay attention to it looking larger. Well, that's correct. But that's just my inability to make these circles the same size.
Oh,
But it's certainly closer. As a matter of fact, they're touching. All right? They're touching. So this represents, at a later time now, this is once we've had centuries and centuries to have this relationship on the left, to discover a closer way to interact with divinity and discover, if we're so blessed, the spiritual purpose of life, a spiritual or religious desire to be as close to God as possible. The word for that is dveikut, or in Yiddish, or in modern Hebrew, dveikus, right? Dveikut in Hebrew, dveikus in Yiddish. Dveikus is that, yedid nefesh, when you're singing that and you close your eyes and you feel like you feel like you're touching the face of God. You feel like you're being touched. You feel like God as a friend. That's your relationship where you get that close. Even for a fleeting moment, that is the goal, right? That's the goal, even if it's just for a moment, to have that, to be able to breathe, and to feel that we're being breathed at the same time. I sometimes use that meditation, Nishmat Kol Chai, in services, that feeling of being breathed and breathing at the same time. Now, interestingly, we might look at this as a mystical or spiritual understanding of the relationship between God and us. However, it also represents the entire body of Jewish law. Why? Because through a mitzvah, now remember, the word mitzvah does not mean a good deed. It comes from an Aramaic word, means to connect to. Savta, mitzvah, savta, not savta like grandfather. Right? So the mitzvah is a connecting device. It is a portal through which we gain a opportunity to touch and be touched. It's the Michelangelo moment. It's the space between the fingers touching in the Sistine Chapel, right? That's the mitzvah. The mitzvah enables that moment, that opportunity present itself. Okay? Which is the same, so that means that all of halakha is intended to do that. Halakha, which basically means lelechet, to walk, walk in this way, walk like this.
And I'm on the phone too.
Who's Chaya?
Sherry?
Mark, Grey Boy's joined us. Wonderful. Okay, you with me? It also leads to ethical action. So you see, I wrote there, the wolf and the lamb shall feed together, from Ishayahu, from Isaiah, right? So being a closeness to divinity through what we understand to be somehow God's revelation to us in the world at Sinai and beyond through the understanding of the rabbis, leads us to closedness, and right action and ethical action to make this world, because we're the ones who have to make the world in which the wolf and the lamb shall feed together. And that's where we're headed to in diagram on the lower left. Well, now I'm going to skip to the diagram in the lower right, however, because that's the most confusing one. And actually, I couldn't figure out how to draw it. I could on my computer. This little blue circle actually needs to be inside, right there, the black circle. The black circle is supposed to be touching the blue circle like it is here, right? Like, sorry, light it is there. And the blue circle is supposed to be in the middle here. I'm going to show it to you in the book real briefly, what it's supposed to look like. If you look in your lower right, you see that?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's, I just couldn't duplicate it. Let me go back to that. Where is it? Okay. So what's going on here? This represents a transition in Jewish thought from the Zohar on. So remember, the Zohar, we don't really know its origins. It dates back to Yochanan ben Zakkai, whether a fellow by the name of MOSh de Leon in Spain in the 13th century, he said he was channeling the words of ben Zakkai. We don't know, but it's the beginning of Kabbalah. It's the beginning of a understanding of our relationship to the divinity that us renewalists claim from the Baal Shem Tov, who was, of course, steeped in all of this. And okay, so what's going on here? Remember, this circle is supposed to be inside here, and this is supposed to be touching. Okay, this is the same color as the larger one, the smaller one. This smaller circle represents the Shekhinah. The larger circle represents HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So you see, the Shekhinah has broken, is in exile, still attached to, but not subsumed within the larger divinity. Shekhinah lives within here, within us, within our reality. Interestingly, Shechuna, which is the same root, is the word for neighborhood. So Shekhinah is in the neighborhood, right? Hi, Ruth, welcome.
Hi.
Are you in Greensboro?
Yeah.
Ah, welcome. So Shekhinah meaning neighborhood, and the Shekhinah being in the neighborhood, that's our buddy. That's who we relate to. That's the God sense that we have as, and it's related to the larger circle. Okay, our jobs, when we do a mitzvah, what in essence is happening is the repair of this smaller circle to return to the larger circle.
Oh.
That is tikkun olam, my friends. Tikkun olam, it's become in our common parlance to mean good deeds, but in a mystical sense, it means the repair of the Godhead. You with me? And we are partners in making that happen. That is a mind blower and revolutionary, that we can have an effect on divinity in repairing and taking it back to before there was a before. Bayom hahu Adonai Echad. On that day, God, right, Adon Yud Hei Vav will be one. That's what that means. That this smaller circle, that Shekhinah, will no longer be in exile. I want to bring to your attention a intention that we say before many mitzvot, right? Including before counting the Omer. And this is also an intention said before putting on the tefillin and putting on the talis. The Shem Yichud Kedusha Baricho Ushechinte. What does that mean? For the sake of the Yichud. What's Yichud? It's oneness, putting back, for the oneness of putting back together. It's from the same word for echad. For the sake of the unification of Kudsha Baruch Hu, right, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and God's Shekhinah, between the male and the female aspect. So here you can see Shekhinah, and this is what the Zohar is so good at. It needs some way to express opposites. And of course, female and male is a wonderful way to do that. And so Shekhinah and HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the larger circle, I'm going to be reunited. And then the divinity is going to sing, reunited, and it feels so good. Zohar uses gender to represent God's exile. That is what we're doing, okay? Look at the bottom. The smaller dot represents later Kabbalistic notion that within the created universe, there are sparks of the divine. Those, right? This is the breaking of the way. The smaller circle within us, within creation, hidden within creation. This is basic Kabbalah 101. Okay, you with me? Any questions? Because I want to go to the fourth part here. Everybody good? All righty. The fourth part, Malocho la'aretz kavodo. Those are also words of Ishayahu, of Isaiah the prophet. The entire world is filled with God's glory. From everything that we've talked about to this point, this is going to make sense. How does it make sense? What is going on here? I'm sorry, in the one on the lower left. What's your sense of that?
We're united.
Well,
We're in God.
we are in, yes, and what's the second part of that statement?
God is in us.
And God is in us,
Yes.
right? When we sing, Asuli Mikdash v'shachanti petocham, right? When God says, gives the directions to build the Mishkan in the desert, we've come to understand it to mean, build me a sanctuary and I will dwell within them. Build a place. So this is what we do and what we accomplish when we prepare our own selves to receive divinity by whatever our spiritual practice is, whether it is prayer, whether it is mindfulness, whether it is gardening or washing the dishes or parenting, right? Whatever it is that makes us feel that sense of awe, of wonder, where we forget. You remember Joni Mitchell sings, I love you when I forget about me, right? I am on a lonely road and I am traveling, right? I love you when I forget about me. That is how that happens. I love you, God, when I forget about me. And then when I think about you, I realize you're inside of me. And then I even understand, love your neighbor as yourself, right? Even more deeply, right? V'ahavta re'acha kamocha. How could I hate you when you are have the same divinity inside of you? And I look at you and I see that. All right. So this is what we train. That lower left is what spiritual practice is all about. To train ourselves to be aware as many moments of the day as we can to our connection to the all, to our connection to each other, to connection to nature, to connection to the great mystery which we can call God. Asuli Mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, O Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary, tried and true, pure and holy, tried and true, and in thanksgiving, I'll be a willing sanctuary to you. That, my friends, is the purpose of our yearning. That is the destination, I should better say, of our yearning. To feel what's going on in that lower quadrant. that God is within us and we are within God. And there, in the fastest hour on TV, fastest half hour on TV, you have a quick description of the evolution of Jewish thought and the relationship between God and us and God's creation. I thank you as always for being here. There are a couple of people who I don't know that I know. Ruth, I know you're on the mailing list. Julie, show yourself, if it's okay. Hi, welcome. Do we know each other? Or is this our first opportunity? Maybe I can try to unmute.
There we go. Yes, I'm in Sarasota, Florida.
Oh, beautiful. Hi, Julie.
Yes.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Terrific. Well, as always, I want to encourage you all just to help spread the word about this. Pass the emails on that this is happening. I'll be here again next week. Where I think I want to do is I want to continue this conversation. Think about your relationship to divinity and the evolution of your theology. Okay, and if God, what God, where God, who's God, you know, how you've arrived at it. I would love to have a conversation and for us to be able to share with each other just a few sentences, if possible, where we are in our Jewish theological thinking. Okay, and then I'll share with you a wonderful cartoon from Gary Larson next week. The one I think I've shared it before about Reb Zalman, of blessed memory, referring to some people as having a pediatric understanding of the divine. Yes, and Jay is pointing his finger because that's what I'm talking about. And I have a couple of other good ones of his too. One entitled "Acts of God." All righty. Thank you all very, very much. I'm going to stop my recording here. And like I did last week, I'm going